I have been a culinary instructor at the Velcassar Annex for 11 years, and in that time I have failed 143 cadets, passed 217, and awarded exactly 3 marks of distinction. I say this not to establish authority. The Annex does not require me to justify my numbers to anyone, but because the number matters for what I am about to describe. 143 failed, 217 passed, 3 distinctions. After the qualifying exam on the last day of the 3rd term, those numbers changed. I will try to be precise. I am Dreth, and precision is the first thing we learn. The chemistry of a stock is not approximate, the temperature window for a reduction is not negotiable, and the distance between a meal that sustains and a meal that speaks is measured in choices made before the pan is hot. My people process the world through olfaction first, sight second, and tactile sensation third, which means a kitchen is, for me, a place of almost painful information density. Every compound in the air has a history. Every surface tells me what touched it last. When I walk into the 3rd floor practical kitchen before an exam, I can read the room the way a Sulen reads a pressure differential, not consciously, not as an act of will, but as the automatic function of a body that was built to know these things. I could smell the human before I saw her. This is not an unusual thing to say about humans if you have read the literature. Humans run at a core temperature that most species achieve only during metabolic stress. Their skin is continuously active, glands, follicles, a chemistry that shifts with exertion and mood, and whatever they consumed in the past 12 hours. In a classroom setting, this is mild background noise. In a kitchen, where my olfactory array is already fully deployed, a human at rest produces a signal I can locate within roughly 2 body lengths without looking. I am not saying this to be indelicate. I am saying it because it is relevant to what happened, and because I need you to understand that I was aware of Marit Dune long before the morning's examination began. Her file was thin. That is the institutional word for it, thin, but what it means in practice is that the admissions office had very little to work with. No academy transcripts, no standardized competency scores from a recognized galactic testing body, a notation that she had completed coursework at a human culinary institution called, if I am rendering it correctly, a community college, which the Annex's cross-referencing system had flagged as non-standard and declined to assign a tier. She had also worked for approximately 4 years aboard cargo vessels in various food preparation roles, which the system had classified under unverified practical experience, and again, declined to tier. The admissions office, in their wisdom, had placed her in the general qualifying cohort on the grounds that they had no better category for her, and had given her Station 14, which is the station in the back left corner of the 3rd floor kitchen, farthest from the supply rack, with the burner unit that runs approximately 3 degrees cooler than its calibrated value, and the exhaust hood that requires manual adjustment every 40 minutes or the smoke management becomes unreliable. Station 14 is where we put the cadets we expect to fail quietly. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I did not design the station assignment system. I did not put her there. But I saw the assignment when I reviewed the cohort list the morning before the exam, and I did not change it, and that is a thing I will carry for some time. Let me describe the kitchen, because the geography matters. The 3rd floor practical kitchen at the Velcassar Annex is a long, rectangular room with 18 meters of clear floor space running east to west and 11 meters running north to south. 30 stations arranged in 5 rows of 6, each station a preparation surface, a burner cluster, a small refrigerated hold unit, and overhead storage. The supply rack, a floor-to-ceiling array of common-use ingredients, supplementary stocks, and shared equipment, runs along the north wall. The assessment table, where I evaluate finished preparations at the end of an exam, is at the south end of the room near the instructor's station. The drainage and waste channels run along the east and west walls. Station 14 is in the back left corner, which on the 3rd floor kitchen map is the northwest quadrant. farthest from the assessment table, farthest from the supply rack, adjacent to the west drainage channel, with a single small window that admits north-facing light of a quality that does nothing useful for color assessment of a finished plate. It is not the worst station in the room because no station in the room is designed to be worse than any other. The annex does not officially maintain different quality stations, but it is, in practice, the station that accumulates the deferred maintenance items. The burner calibration that gets bumped to next cycle, the exhaust hood gasket that will be replaced during the summer shutdown, the refrigerated hold unit whose internal temperature sensor has been reading approximately 1 degree warm for several months. It is the station where the small things aggregate, because it is the corner, and the corner is easy to defer. I reviewed the cohort list at 7th hour the morning before the exam. I saw Station 14, and I saw Merritt Dune's name attached to it, and I saw her file flagged non-standard with no tier assignment. I told myself that the station assignment was an administrative matter, not an instructional one. I told myself that a qualifying exam is designed to be passed by any cadet who is qualified to pass it, regardless of station, and that if the equipment at Station 14 was a meaningful impediment, I would note it in my assessment and account for it in the grade. These things were true. They were also, I think now, the thoughts of a person who had already decided not to intervene and was finding the institutional language to support the decision rather than make it. I went to bed and slept adequately and arrived at the kitchen at the 6th hour the next morning to run my pre-exam checks. The qualifying exam for third-term culinary sciences runs 4 hours. Each cadet is assigned an ingredient package delivered to their station at the opening bell: proteins, aromatics, starches, a fat source, liquids, and a selection of dried and fresh botanical seasonings. The rubric grades on 4 criteria: technical execution, flavor coherence, presentation, and this is the criterion that separates our program from a pure technical institution: creative decision. A cadet who executes a textbook preparation flawlessly receives high marks in the first 3 categories. A cadet who executes a textbook preparation flawlessly and makes one deliberate choice that the preparation did not require, but that the finished dish is improved by, receives a possible mark in the 4th. We are not training technicians. We are training cooks. The ingredient packages are standardized. Every cadet in the same cohort receives the same package, which is a safeguard against the argument that one cadet's starting material was superior to another's. It is also, I will note, a safeguard that is trivially easy to circumvent if you know the layout of the kitchen and you arrive before the exam begins. The 4 Sulen cadets, I will call them by their designations rather than their names, because their names are now part of a formal disciplinary record that is not mine to reproduce here, were Tier 2 seniors in their 4th term. They were not enrolled in the qualifying cohort. They had no legitimate reason to be in the 3rd floor kitchen on the morning of the exam. The Sulen are a species that processes social hierarchy through pressure differential sensing. They read status from the slight variations in air displacement produced by posture, movement, and proximity to resources. A Sulen in a dominant social configuration walks differently than one in a subordinate configuration, and a group of Sulen in a dominant configuration tends, as a behavioral reflex, to redistribute resources from the perceived subordinate toward themselves. It is not malice in the human sense. It is closer to what your biologists might call an instinctive territorial behavior, the impulse of a dominant group to assert dominance through the visible management of resources. It is also, under Velcassar Annex academic policy, misconduct of the first order. I should have acted on it the moment I saw them by the supply rack. I did not act on it immediately. I am ashamed of this. I am recording it here because the shame is part of the record. And because I believe a complete account requires both what happened to Merritt Dune and what I chose not to do in the moments when I could have chosen otherwise. What I told myself, In the seconds I stood at the kitchen entrance and watched the 4 seniors moving between stations, was that I was not certain of their intent. Sulen cadets sometimes assist with pre-exam preparation as a supervised community activity. They were not yet touching anything I could clearly see. I was not certain. I waited. The bell rang at the 7th hour, station time. Each cadet broke the seal on their ingredient package. The sound of 30 seals being broken in near unison is one of the sounds I associate most strongly with the beginning of something real. Not the preamble, not the lecture, not the preparatory sessions where technique is demonstrated and corrected and demonstrated again, but the thing itself. A kitchen, a problem, a clock, and 30 cadets trying to solve the problem before the clock runs out. I walked the floor, as I always do in the opening minutes, not grading, just observing, getting a sense of which cadets were composing their approach and which were diving in with hands before minds. It is an old habit and a useful one. A cadet who doesn't know what they're making in the first 10 minutes rarely improves in the remaining 3 hours and 50 minutes. I came to station 14 last. Marit Doon was standing at her station with her hands flat on the preparation surface, looking at her ingredient package with an expression I did not have the cultural frame to read immediately. She is a human of medium height, brown-skinned, with the kind of forearms that suggest she has spent significant time doing physical work with her hands. Not the deliberate muscle development of a sports cadet, but the settled, functional development that comes from years of repetitive skilled labor. Her hair was tied back tightly, secured with what appeared to be a piece of heat-resistant cord rather than any of the standard accessories. She wore the standard-issue preparation apron over the annex uniform. Her eyes were moving across the package contents with what I can only describe as professional inventory. Not excitement, not apprehension. Not the mild anxiety I see in most cadets in the first moments of a qualifying exam, when the scope of the task is fully present for the first time, and the body registers the reality of 4 hours and 30 graded presentations. Just inventory. The look of someone who has done this enough times that the opening assessment is simply the opening assessment, a data-gathering exercise, not an emotional one. She said without looking up, "The burner's running low." I said 3 degrees. It's a known calibration issue. She said, "I'll add time to the reduction then." That was the entirety of our exchange. She had diagnosed the equipment, adjusted her approach, and moved on, all in the time it took me to say 8 words. I noted it and continued my circuit. I want to dwell on that exchange for a moment because I think it contained something I missed at the time. The standard cadet response to a burner calibration issue is to raise the issue with the instructor, request a station reassignment if one is available, or flag the problem and ask for it to be noted in the assessment record as a mitigating factor. All of these are reasonable responses. All of them treat the calibration issue as an obstacle imposed from outside that needs to be addressed through the institution's processes. Marit Doon did not do any of these things. She did not raise the issue with me beyond statting it. She did not request reassignment. She did not ask for the problem to be noted. She identified the deficit in the equipment, calculated its effect on one of her preparation steps, adjusted that step, and continued. The calibration issue was not an obstacle. It was a parameter. She updated her parameters and moved forward. I did not understand, standing at station 14 in the first minutes of the exam, how significant that distinction was. I understand it now. It was approximately 20 minutes into the exam when I noticed station 14's aromatics were gone. I should explain what I mean by gone. The aromatics in a standard ingredient package for this exam are a bundle of fresh root vegetables, 3 varieties, Velketh origin, with a fat, sweet base note and a sharp finishing compound that most advanced cadets use to build the flavor scaffolding of their primary preparation. They are not optional in the sense that any rubric-compliant preparation will incorporate them in some form. Without aromatics, a cadet cannot produce a rubric-compliant dish. The aromatics are the foundation. Merritt Dune's aromatics were not at her station. Her protein was there. Her starch was there. Her fat source and her liquid measure were there. Her dried botanicals were there. Her fresh botanical selection was there. Her aromatics were not. I looked across the kitchen. I could see, at Station 3, a station occupied by a Sulan senior I will call Designation 1, a second aromatic bundle set to the side of an already opened package. The package at Station 3 had been opened. The station at Station 3 had not been assigned to any qualifying cadet. Station 3 is in the front row of the kitchen, well positioned relative to the supply rack and the assessment table, and is not the kind of station a cadet would leave unoccupied during an exam unless they were not a qualifying cadet. Designation 1 was standing at Station 3 with her arms loose at her sides, the Sulan neutral subordinate posture, which is not a natural resting position but a deliberate assumption of low-status body language, typically deployed when a Sulan expects to be questioned. I walked to Station 3. I moved at the pace of an instructor conducting routine rounds, not at the pace of an instructor responding to an incident. This was a deliberate choice, and I am not proud of it. I did not want to escalate, which is a very comfortable way of saying I did not want the confrontation. I said, "These aromatics need to return to Station 14. Designation 1 said, "I found them near the supply rack. I assumed they had been misplaced." She had not found them near the supply rack. The supply rack is on the north wall, opposite the west drainage channel. Station 14 is in the northwest corner. To travel from Station 14 to the supply rack, an aromatic bundle would need to move approximately 14 meters across an active kitchen floor during the opening minutes of a qualifying exam, which is not a thing that aromatics do on their own, and which is not a path that accidental displacement would take given the station layout. The aromatics were at Station 3, which is in the front row, which is in the opposite direction from the supply rack. But I had not seen the transfer. I had not been watching Station 14 during the first 20 minutes. I had been walking my circuit, attending to 29 other stations, conducting routine observation. I had no direct observation of the transfer. The disciplinary framework at the Velcassar Annex requires direct observation or a recorded incident, a camera log entry, a witness account, a physical trace that cannot be attributed to accident for a formal finding. I had none of these things. I returned the aromatics to Station 14 and noted the incident in my exam log. My notation read, "Aromatic bundle from Station 14 observed at Station 3. Designation 1 present at Station 3. Attribution unclear. No formal finding at this time." Merritt Dune looked at the returned aromatics. She looked at them the way a person looks at a thing they had already accounted for not having, not with relief, not with irritation that they had been taken. She looked at them with the focused assessment of someone recalculating. She said again without looking up, "They've been handled. Some of the outer leaves are bruised." I said, "I'm aware. You may discard the damaged material." She said, "I'll work with them." She had not yet begun to panic. She had not yet begun to ask questions about process or attribution or fairness. She picked up a paring instrument, not the Annex Standard blade, which is a broad-handled instrument designed for the multi-digit grip of the most common enrolled species, but a small, distinctly non-standard tool she had apparently brought from her own kit, short-handled and curved in a way I associated with human food preparation I had seen documented. And she began trimming the bruised sections with a speed and economy of motion that was, to be direct, better than most fourth-term cadets I had watched at that task. The Annex Standard blade is designed for precision. Her blade was designed for speed. She was using it precisely. The bruised outer leaves came away in continuous strips, not in chunks, which minimizes waste and preserves the maximum viable material underneath. A student of the Annex Formal program would take 30 seconds per root vegetable to achieve that. She was doing it in 8. I stood at her station a moment longer than was professionally necessary. She said, "I'm fine." She had not looked up. I moved on. 40 minutes into the exam, her protein was gone. The protein in the standard package for this exam is a cut of Velrath pressed sinew, a dense, fiber-rich preparation medium that rewards slow cooking and becomes unworkable if hurried. It is the centerpiece of most rubric-compliant preparations at the third-term level because it is the component that requires the most technical precision to handle correctly. Too much heat, and it contracts and toughens. Too little, and the internal structure never develops the right give. Most cadets build their preparation around the protein's requirements, adjusting every other element, temperature, timing, liquid ratios, botanical additions, to serve the protein's timeline. Merritt Dune's protein was not at her station. I noticed this during my second circuit, which I run at approximately the 40-minute mark, later than the first because I want cadets to have committed to their preparation paths before I assess their progress. By 40 minutes, a cadet with a competent approach has usually made several irreversible decisions. The protein is in a preparation vessel, the liquid has been applied or withheld, the aromatics are engaged. The state of the station at 40 minutes tells me more about the cadet's competence than the state at 20, because by 40 minutes the easy path, the path of someone who does not know what they are doing, has already diverged from the competent path. Station 14's protein was not at the station. I looked across the room. I could see, at Station 11, assigned to no qualifying cadet, a protein package sitting in a sealed state on the preparation surface. Station 11 is mid-room, south side, a position that makes no sense as a location for a protein package that has traveled from Station 14, except that Station 11 was the station closest to where Designation 2 had been standing when I completed my first circuit. I went to Station 11. The protein was there. I could not demonstrate it had come from Station 14. I returned it to Station 14 and noted the second incident in my exam log. When I set the protein on the preparation surface of Station 14, Merritt Dune looked at it. She looked at it for slightly longer than she had looked at the returned aromatics, and I understood, watching her face, that she was doing arithmetic. Not emotional arithmetic, not the arithmetic of grievance or calculation of fairness. Practical arithmetic. Time elapsed, 40 minutes. Time remaining, 3 hours and 20 minutes. Protein requires slow preparation. Minimum 90 minutes for a presentation-ready cut of Velrath pressed sinew at the burner temperature available to her. She had 3 hours and 20 minutes and a protein that needed 90 minutes. The arithmetic worked. She picked up the protein and set it in her preparation vessel and began the process. She did not comment on where the protein had been. She did not ask me whether I was going to do something about the Sulen seniors. She had assessed the situation with the accuracy of a person who already understood the situation completely and had decided that discussion was not useful, and she returned to her preparation. I noted this. I stood at the edge of her station for a moment and noted it with the part of my mind that is always observing, always assessing, even when the assessment is not part of the formal process. There was something in her manner that I could not fit into any of the standard categories I use for cadet assessment. It was not confidence in the ordinary sense. Confidence in this context usually presents as forward posture, direct eye contact, a slight acceleration in movement that signals belief in the outcome. It was something quieter and more settled than that. It was the manner of a person who has decided that the present task is going to get their full attention and their full competence, and that anything that is not the present task can be addressed when the present task is done. I moved on. At the 1 hour mark, I did a third circuit and found her starch allocation gone. The starch in the standard package is a dried grain of the Velrath variety, which cooks into a dense, absorptive base that most cadets use to anchor the plate, the foundation that holds the protein and its preparation liquid in a structural relationship during plating and during the first bites of eating. It is not the most interesting component of the preparation matrix, but it is the load-bearing one, and its absence creates a problem that is not easily solved by substitution, because most substitutes either change the flavor character of the plate substantially or fail to perform the structural function. Marit Dune had no starch. I found it at Station 7, which was Dav Oral Station, the Veth Core third termer I mentioned earlier, and which was close enough to Station 14 that the transfer could have been accomplished quickly and without obvious movement. I retrieved the starch. I noted the incident. By now my exam log had 3 entries, and I was watching the Sulen senior group with close attention, and still not accumulating the direct observation I needed for a formal finding, because they were executing their approach with a sophistication that suggested they had thought about this beforehand. I want to pause here and say something about what I was feeling, because it is relevant to the complete account, and because I think an honest record of this exam requires me to include the instructor's interior state alongside the facts of what happened. I was angry. I should say this plainly. I was angry. Not in the volcanic way, not in the way that announces itself in the voice or the body language, but in the cold, banked way that sits underneath professional composure and makes everything sharper. I had now retrieved 3 of Marit Dune's components from 3 locations where they had no reason to be, logged 3 incidents I could not formally attribute, and watched 4 Sulen cadets move around my kitchen with the coordinated ease of a group executing a plan they had designed in advance. I had 143 failed cadets and 217 passed cadets and 3 distinctions in 11 years of instruction. And the thing that was happening in front of me was a violation of everything the Annex's qualifying process is supposed to mean. And I still did not have direct observation. The disciplinary framework exists for reasons that are good reasons. False attributions cause harm. The requirement for direct observation or documented evidence is a protection against abuse of the system. I know this. I believe this. I also know from standing in that kitchen that the framework can function as cover for a kind of harm that the framework was not designed to address. The harm of an action taken slowly, carefully, in increments, by people who know exactly how much space the framework leaves them. At the 1 hour and 20-minute mark, I noted that Marit Dune's fat source was gone. At the 1 hour and 40-minute mark, I noted that approximately 2/3 of her fresh botanical selection was gone. Each time, I recovered what I could find and returned it. Each time, the item had traveled to a location that was plausible as accidental displacement and implausible as anything else. Each time, I noted the incident without the direct observation required to make it a formal finding. What I did not note, in my exam log, was what was happening at Station 14 in between these recoveries. She was cooking. This is the flat fact of it, and it becomes the whole story if you understand what it means. She was cooking with what they had left her at each interval, and she was building something. And the something she was building was not a rubric-compliant preparation in any standard sense, but it was becoming, in the air above Station 14, a signal that my olfactory array had begun flagging as significant in the 2nd hour of the exam. Let me trace what she did, because I was watching closely by then, and the trace is important. When her aromatics were first taken before I returned them, she did not stop. She was 20 minutes into the exam, and she had protein, starch, fat, liquid, and botanicals. Rather than waiting for the aromatics or improvising around their absence in a way that would commit her to a rubric preparation without the foundation component. She began building something from the botanical selection and the liquid, an infusion, simmered in the small pot from her equipment kit. I had seen cadets make infusions before, but they are typically made late in a preparation, as a finishing element. She was building it in the opening act, which meant she was either very confident about where the preparation was going, or she did not know where the preparation was going and was beginning by making something useful from what was immediately available. When I returned the aromatics, she incorporated them into the infusion rather than redirecting to the standard aromatic first approach. The infusion became a base. She trimmed the bruised outer layers which she had initially set aside, not discarded, and simmered those separately in a smaller vessel with a portion of the liquid. Two preparations running simultaneously, 25 minutes in. When her protein was taken and returned, she set it to slow preparation in the larger vessel, using the aromatic base as the preparation liquid rather than the straight liquid measure. This is not a standard third-term technique. It produces a result that is richer and more integrated than a standard braise preparation, because the protein cooks inside the flavor it will eventually sit beside, rather than having that flavor applied after. The technique is taught in the fifth-term advanced program. I had not taught it in the third-term qualifying curriculum, because most third-term cadets do not have the timing precision to execute it without overcooking the protein in the process. She was not overcooking the protein. She had added the 3-degree adjustment to her timing, and she was watching the preparation with the attention of someone who can read a cooking medium by appearance and aroma rather than by instrument, which is an advanced skill, and one I test for specifically in the fourth-term practical, because it is the skill that separates a technician from a cook. When her starch was taken and returned, she set it to soak in a portion of the infusion rather than the plain water specified in the standard starch preparation process. Soaking in a flavored medium changes the absorption character of the dried grain and requires adjustment to the cooking time and the liquid ratio, because a flavored medium soaks differently than plain water, and the grain will be at risk of oversaturation if the standard timing is followed. She adjusted both. Without being asked, and without consulting the reference charts posted at each station for exactly this kind of calculation, she adjusted both. I had been watching for 40 minutes by the time she lost her fat source and her fresh botanicals. By then, I was spending more time at Station 14 than at any other station in the room, and I was becoming aware that this was professionally anomalous, and I was finding it difficult to care about the anomaly. Something was happening at that station that I did not want to miss. When the fat source was gone, returned, of course, after I found it across the room, but gone for a window of approximately 12 minutes while I completed the circuit and identified where it had been taken, she had sourced a substitute. She had done this by observing the adjacent stations. Deathworlder at Station 7 had been producing a broth-based preparation that was generating rendered fat as a byproduct of his protein preparation, the small pool of liquid fat that accumulates when a fatty protein is exposed to heat. Most cadets treat this as waste and skim it off. Merritt Dune had asked Deathworlder, in the quiet, direct way I was beginning to recognize as her mode of address, if she could use the drippings he was going to discard. Deathworlder, who was deep in his broth preparation and not paying attention to anything outside his own station, said yes without looking up. She used the drippings as her fat source for the next 12 minutes. When I returned her actual fat source, she incorporated it alongside the drippings in a way that treated the two as complementary rather than substitutes, the rendered protein fat providing a depth of flavor that the Annex standard fat source does not produce, and the Annex standard fat providing the emulsification base for the finish sauce she was beginning to build. I did not know she was building a finish sauce. I identified it as a finish sauce in retrospect, when I could see the full preparation. At the time, it was a small vessel of something on the back of the burner cluster, simmering at a heat that she was maintaining with adjustments so small and so frequent that they looked like restlessness to anyone watching casually. They were not restlessness. She was managing the heat with her hand near the burner control, making adjustments before the preparation showed signs of needing them. She was reading the preparation ahead of the preparation. She was cooking the sauce she could see coming a minute from now, not the sauce she could see right now, which is the thing that a cook does when the preparation and the cook are fully integrated and the cook's attention is running slightly ahead of the moment. I had been teaching for 11 years, and I could count on one sensory appendage the number of times I had watched a cadet do this, in a third-term qualifying exam. When the fresh botanicals were largely gone, I recovered what I could find, a portion of the selection. The rest was not locatable in the kitchen by the time I looked for it. She rearranged the dried botanical array. I want to describe this rearrangement because it was the moment when I stopped conducting routine assessment and started paying the kind of attention that I give to exceptional work. The dried botanical selection for this exam includes 14 varieties, arranged in the standard grouping of 3 flavor families, a resinous group of 4, a citric group of 4, and a deep ferment group of 6. I had labeled and arranged the packages in the standard way, which is by family, because teaching cadets to work within flavor families is the correct pedagogical approach at the third-term level. It teaches the organizing principle before introducing the complexity of cross-family interactions. She took all 14 packages and arranged them along the edge of her preparation surface in a new order, not by family. The new order was, as I identified after several minutes of observation, a bridge order, each variety adjacent to the variety it shared the most volatile compound with, creating a continuous bridge of compatible compounds across all 14 packages rather than 3 separate family groupings. The bridge crossed family lines multiple times. A citric variety placed beside a resinous variety they share a mid-range volatile with. A deep ferment variety placed beside a citric variety that resolves the deep ferment's harshest compound into something more approachable when they are used in sequence. Flavor bridge sequencing is taught in the advanced program. I teach it in the second module of the 5th term. It is not in the third-term qualifying curriculum because it requires an understanding of volatile compound interactions that the third-term program builds toward but does not complete. A third-term cadet working from the curriculum I had taught them would not know how to construct a bridge order across all 14 varieties without a reference chart. Marit Dune constructed it from memory in approximately 4 minutes, in the middle of an active preparation, while monitoring 2 vessels on the burner cluster and managing the rate on a simmering finish sauce. I stood at the edge of Station 14 and watched her work for 6 minutes. I have said this already. What I did not say, the first time I said it, is what was happening in me during those 6 minutes. My olfactory array was fully engaged. The signal coming off Station 14 by the 2-hour mark was, "This is not a figure of speech. This is a direct description of what I was experiencing, the most coherent compound sequence I had encountered in a working kitchen in several years. Not the most technically precise. Not the most complex in the sense of having the most components. The most coherent. The most like a single, integrated conversation conducted across all the flavor elements in the preparation simultaneously, where every compound was speaking to every other compound rather than existing separately in the same space. The smell of a preparation tells me things that tasting it later confirms or fails to confirm. What the smell of Station 14 was telling me at the 2-hour mark was that the preparation was unified. It was one thing, not one thing made from many components. All preparations are that. This was one thing in the sense that the components had been chosen and arranged and timed so that they had become something that could not be disaggregated back into its parts without destroying it. The protein had taken on the character of the aromatic base it had cooked in. The starch had taken on the character of the infusion it had soaked in. The dried botanicals were being added to the finished sauce in the bridge order she had constructed, which meant each addition was building on the previous addition rather than existing beside it. The rendered drippings from Dav Oral Station and the standard fat source were integrating in the sauce in a way that was producing something neither would produce alone. She glanced up at me once during those 6 minutes, just a glance. The expression was, and I have thought about this expression many times since, not irritated by the observation, not performing for it, not asking for acknowledgement or confirmation. It was the expression of someone who had registered my presence, assessed that my presence was not a problem and returned to the work. The assessment had taken perhaps half a second. I was background information. The preparation was foreground. I moved on. I had 29 other stations and 29 cadets I was responsible for assessing, and I went to them. I assessed them. Most of them were producing competent preparations that would pass the qualifying exam comfortably. 3 were struggling with their timing and would require careful note-taking to determine whether their final presentations met the threshold. 1 had made an early error in protein preparation that I did not see how she was going to recover from. I noted all of this. I went around the room and I noted it. And then, in the final 40 minutes of the exam, the Sulan senior group made their last move, and I was in a position to witness it directly. I was at Station 19, working through the rubric assessment of a Veth Corps cadet who had produced a technically competent but culinarily unambitious cold preparation. Everything correctly done, nothing memorably decided, when I heard the sound of a cookware unit being relocated. Cookware on the third-floor kitchen surfaces produces a particular resonance. The surfaces are a composite material with a slight acoustic reverb that I have learned to read the way my olfactory array reads volatiles, as a source of information about what is happening in the room when I am not directly looking at it. The relocation of a full-sized pan across a composite surface produces a sound that carries approximately 8 meters in normal kitchen conditions. From Station 19 to Station 14 is approximately 9 meters. I heard it clearly. I turned. Designation 2, the largest of the Sulan senior group, was at Station 14. He had both hands on the rim of Marit Dune's small-gauge pan. The pan had been on the burner. The finished sauce was in the pan. He was lifting it. She was standing at the preparation surface, her back to him, arranging the final botanical additions in the bridge sequence. She had not turned around. She was, from my vantage, not reacting to him at all, just standing at the surface, hands moving through the last steps of a preparation she was very close to completing. He said in Sulan, which he may have believed she would not understand, though Sulan is a required second language for all annex transfer students. He said, "This doesn't matter anyway. You're going to fail regardless. We're saving you the embarrassment of turning in a failure." I was already moving. I was perhaps 6 stations away, and I was moving at a pace that was no longer pretending to be routine assessment. She said in Sulan, without turning around, she said, "Put it down." Her Sulan was not accented. I note this because language acquisition varies, and because many transfer students carry a heavy accent in their second language, particularly when speaking under stress. Her Sulan was clean. Not native, there was a slight rhythmic difference from a native speaker's cadence, but clean, which means she had studied it seriously and practiced it enough that the stress did not degrade her pronunciation. She spoke it the way a person speaks a language they learned because they needed it, not because it was required. Designation 2 said, "You don't have the standing to." She said, "I'm not arguing with you about standing. Put the pan down." There was something in her voice that I cannot fully characterize. Not anger. I know what anger sounds like, and this was not it. Not fear. There was nothing in her voice or her posture that registered fear, and I was close enough by then that I would have heard it. The nearest word I have in Dreth is the word we use for the moment when a structural material reaches the boundary between elastic deformation and permanent deformation. The moment when the material has absorbed as much pressure as it can absorb and will now either return to its original shape or permanently change. The material is still intact. It has not broken, but the behavior of the material at that boundary is different from the behavior of material well within its elastic range. It is no longer yielding. It is simply at the edge of what it will yield to. She was not at her limit. I want to be precise about this. She was not at her limit, which is what the Dreth word implies when used loosely. She was at the edge of her patience with the process of managing around the obstruction rather than removing it. There is a difference. A person at their limit is about to break. A person at the edge of their patience with management has made a decision to stop managing and is communicating that decision. She had decided to stop managing. She was communicating it. Designation 2 looked at the pan in his hands. He looked at her back. He set the pan down on the surface beside the burner, not on the burner, and he moved away from Station 14 without another word. He moved to the kitchen entrance, and he left the kitchen, and the other 3 Sulan seniors looked at where he had been, and then at Marit Dune, and then at each other, and within 2 minutes they had all followed him out. I completed my path to Station 14. I had direct observation of the pan transfer, the verbal exchange, and the replacement of the pan on the surface. I noted all of it in my exam log. I now had a formal incident on record. I said, "How long do I have?" She said, "I was going to ask you the same thing." I said, 38 minutes. She looked at the burner. She looked at the pan on the surface beside the burner. She picked up the pan, checked the temperature of the sauce with a technique I had only seen once before. She passed her hand near the surface of the sauce without touching it, close enough to read the radiant heat, which requires a calibrated hand, and is much faster than a temperature instrument once the hand knows how, and she returned the pan to the burner at a position that was, I noted, slightly off-center. The off-center position produces a differential heat across the pan bottom that slows the side of the sauce closest to the burner edge and maintains a gentle movement in the sauce without full circulation. It is a technique for maintaining a sauce at finished temperature without risking reduction. It is not in any textbook I have used at the annex. She said, "That's enough." She was right, that was enough. I spent the last 38 minutes of the exam doing what I am paid to do, which is walk the floor and assess. I assessed 29 cadets in 38 minutes, which works out to roughly 78 seconds per station, which is more than adequate for the level of preparation most of them were producing. I was not proud of the arithmetic, but the arithmetic was honest. I spent the last 4 minutes of the exam at Station 14. The rubric matrix for the third term qualifying exam grades on 4 criteria, as I described at the beginning. Technical execution. Is the preparation correctly produced by the applicable method? Flavor coherence. Do the flavor components work as a unified system rather than a collection of separate elements? Presentation. Does the plated dish communicate the preparation's intent before the first bite? Creative decision. Is there one deliberate choice in the preparation that the rubric did not require, but that the finished dish is improved by? Station 14's preparation did not fit the matrix cleanly. Technical execution. This criterion assumes a specific method. Braise, reduction, emulsification, dry application, cold assembly, each method has a process, and execution grades how precisely the process was followed. Marit Dune's preparation used elements of at least 4 methods, and none of them in their standard sequence. The aromatic infusion base was a reduction technique applied at the opening rather than the close, which inverts the standard braise process and produces a result that is richer because the protein cooks through a medium that has already been fully developed rather than developing alongside the protein. Her trim components from adjacent stations had been handled with a dry sauté technique, typically applied to vegetables in their prime and rarely effective with trim, but which she had applied at a heat and duration that had caramelized the cut surfaces without losing the interior texture. Her dried botanical bridge had been applied as a layered finish rather than incorporated during cooking. Her finished sauce incorporated 2 fat sources in a ratio I was not able to determine by observation, but which had produced a texture and a sheen that suggested precision in the integration. Each of these techniques was correct. None of them was the technique the rubric assumed. Flavor coherence. I tasted the preparation. I do this for every qualifying submission, a standard assessment sample, taken with the annex's calibrated assessment instrument, from a portion of the preparation before the full presentation is plated for formal evaluation. I do this partly for the grade, and partly because, after 11 years, I still think the tasting is the most honest moment in an assessment. The rubric can be gamed, to a limited extent, by a skilled cadet who has studied its requirements and knows how to produce presentations that score well on its specific criteria. The tasting cannot be gamed. The preparation either has flavor coherence or it does not, and if it does, the reason is either skill or luck, and the difference between skill and luck becomes clear over the remainder of the assessment. I tasted the preparation from Station 14, and I will tell you what it tasted like, with the caveat that I am a Dreth tasting with a Dreth olfactory dominant palate, and that my description is filtered through that fact. It tasted like something made by someone who had cooked under a particular kind of pressure for a long time. Not the pressure of an exam, not the pressure of an institution or a grade or a performance context. The pressure of necessity, the requirement to feed people when there is not enough, when the supply is uncertain, when the option is not produce a good dish or produce a bad dish, but produce a dish or produce nothing. And the person doing the cooking has made the choice, many times over many years, to produce the dish. There is a flavor difference between cooking from surplus and cooking from necessity that I cannot describe in terms of specific compounds, because it is not located in specific compounds. It is located in the decisions, in which components are used entirely and which are allowed to rest, in which flavor interactions are built and which are not, in the economy of the preparation. A surplus kitchen produces preparations that include things because things are available. A necessity kitchen produces preparations that include things because each thing is necessary, and the exclusion of anything unnecessary makes the necessary things matter more. The preparation from Station 14 tasted like the second kind. Presentation. She used the standard annex qualifying dish, white, circular, shallow-rimmed. She had arranged the components in a way I will describe as architectural because that word comes closest to what I mean. Not decorative architecture, structural architecture. The arrangement communicated before I tasted where the preparation was going and in what sequence. This element anchors the plate. This element complements the anchor's flavor at the moment when the anchor flavor is at its peak. This element finishes the sequence by resolving the compound chain that the anchor opened. The arrangement was a sentence. It had a beginning, a development, and a resolution, and you could read the sentence before you ate a word of it. Creative decision. I looked at the plate for a long time before I began the formal assessment, trying to identify the deliberate choice she had made, the one choice that the rubric had not required, but that the finished dish was improved by. I was looking for something added, an unexpected element, a departure from the obvious preparation path. I was looking for the decision that the rubric could grade. It took me a longer time than I should admit to recognize that the creative decision was the preparation itself. She had been given almost nothing. She had built something from it, not by substituting available components for unavailable ones, though there was some of that, and not by simplifying the preparation to fit the reduced ingredients, though a simpler preparation would have been defensible. She had built, from what the Sulen senior group had left her after 4 rounds of systematic removal, and the careful recovery of most of what they removed, a preparation that was better than what she could have produced from the full ingredient package, not in the sense of achieving a higher rubric score, in the sense of being a more fully realized dish, a dish in which every component was there because it was necessary and no component was there because it was available, and in which the necessity of each component had been worked out through the process of having too few components and choosing among them with maximum deliberateness. The rubric has a creative decision criterion because we want to identify cadets who make deliberate choices rather than default choices. The criterion assumes the deliberate choice is identifiable as a single decision within a preparation that is otherwise conventional. What the criterion does not have language for is a preparation in which every decision is the creative decision, because the preparation was built decision by decision, from a position of constraint, rather than built choice by choice from a position of availability. I gave her the mark I could justify under the existing framework, which was a distinction, with a notation in the creative decision field that read, criterion not applicable as standardly defined, reviewed under alternate framework, distinction confirmed. The committee asked me, when they reviewed this entry, whether I had applied the rubric correctly. I told them I had applied the rubric correctly in all cases where the rubric was applicable. They asked me what I had applied in the cases where it was not. I told them I had applied honest assessment. After some discussion, and after I provided the account you have been reading, they accepted this. They also accepted my formal incident report. Designations 1 through 4 are the subject of a disciplinary process I am not authorized to describe in full detail. What I can say is that 2 of them have voluntarily withdrawn from the annex, 1 has formally contested the finding, and 1, designation 2, the one who set the pan back down, submitted a written statement to the disciplinary committee in which he said, in part, that he had not expected her to answer him in Sulan, and that when she said put it down, he put it down because the instruction had the quality of something that had been said before, in circumstances more serious than a kitchen exam, by someone who was accustomed to being obeyed in them. I thought about that statement for a long time. I thought about her saying that's enough when I told her she had 38 minutes. Not enough time, just that's enough, full stop, as a statement that the time available was sufficient for the work remaining. The calculation she had done in the half-second after I told her 38 minutes was not the calculation of hope. It was the calculation of someone checking that the resources matched the requirement, finding that they did, and confirming it. She had come from cargo vessels. 4 years on cargo vessels, the file said. I have studied enough human navigation culture to know what the food preparation role on a long-haul cargo vessel entails. The vessel runs on a skeleton crew. The budget for consumables is minimal. The resupply schedule is dependent on route completion, which means it is dependent on weather, mechanical reliability, customer coordination, route hazards, and whatever combination of the above conspired against the vessel on any given leg. The person in the galley is feeding 8 to 12 people, 3 times a day, for months at a stretch, on whatever was loaded at the last port and whatever is left when the next port is still 2 weeks out. There is no margin. There is no option to fail. You adapt, or the crew is hungry, and a hungry crew on a skeleton-staffed cargo vessel is a problem with consequences that do not stay in the galley. The person who learns to cook under those conditions does not learn the same thing as the person who learns to cook in a school kitchen. They learn the same techniques in some cases. They learn entirely different principles. I sat in the empty kitchen after the last cadet had left. I do this sometimes, stay after everyone is gone, when the smells are settling and the equipment is cooling, and the day's work is still in the air in compound form, and I try to assess whether I have done the job correctly. It is a private practice, and I have never described it to anyone before now. I sat in the kitchen, at the station nearest the assessment table, and I thought about the rubric I had written. I thought about the 4 criteria and what each one was designed to measure. Technical execution measures whether the cadet can perform the technique correctly. Flavor coherence measures whether the cadet can make the components work as a system. Presentation measures whether the cadet can communicate the preparation's intent. Creative decision measures whether the cadet can make a choice the rubric did not require. I had written all 4 criteria. I had been writing and refining them for 11 years. I believed they were a comprehensive account of culinary competence at the 3rd term level. Sitting in the empty kitchen, I understood that they were a comprehensive account of culinary competence under a specific set of conditions, and that those conditions had been invisible to me because I had never taught in a kitchen where they were absent. My criteria assumed a full ingredient package. They assumed calibrated equipment. They assumed a stable preparation environment where the primary challenge was the exercise of skill rather than the management of uncertainty. Every criterion I had written was predicated on the assumption that the problem was the same problem I had designed it to be, and that the cadets' task was to solve that problem using the skills I had taught them. Merritt Dune had solved a different problem. She had solved the problem of the kitchen as she found it, not the kitchen as I designed it, and she had solved it with skills I had not taught her, from a tradition I had studied academically and not understood experientially, and the result was something the rubric did not have adequate language for. I sat for a while longer than usual. The kitchen settled around me, the equipment ticking as it cooled, the compound smells of 30 preparations fatting toward the baseline of clean surfaces and dormant burners. The signal from Station 14 was still present in the air, fainter now but still identifiable, still coherent, still telling me what it had been telling me all afternoon, that someone had cooked something unified in that corner of the room, and that the unification had been achieved not by having everything the preparation required, but by understanding the preparation well enough that what was available was sufficient. Merritt Dune is enrolled in the advanced program. She wrote to me after the committee confirmed her grade, a brief message in Standard that said, more or less, that she wanted to be useful and that she hoped the program could teach her things she didn't already know. It was a practical message, not a grateful one, which is the kind of message that tells me something true about the person who wrote it. I wrote back. I said that I expected the learning to go in both directions. She said, "That's good. I learn better when I'm also teaching." This was either the most presumptuous thing a qualifying cadet had said to me in 11 years, or the most accurate assessment of the situation. I have had enough time now to know it was the second. The distinction is the fourth in 11 years. I keep the number because the number matters. 143 failed, 218 passed, 4 distinctions. I have been revising the creative decision criterion since the exam. The revision is not finished. I am trying to write a criterion that does not assume the cadet began with what the rubric intended them to have, a criterion that can assess the quality of the decisions made under actual conditions rather than assigned conditions. Writing such a criterion is harder than it sounds, because the rubric is built on the assumption of a controlled environment, and the controlled environment is built on the assumption that the primary variable is the cadet's skill. Writing a criterion for the case where the environment is also a variable requires me to think about what culinary competence actually is at the level below where I usually teach it, not the level of technique, which I can teach, but the level of principle, which I am finding that I may have understood less well than I thought. My colleague in the Applied Materials program told me, the problem with the rubric is that it grades method, and method assumes the method was possible. When the method wasn't possible, you have to grade something else. Grade the outcome, she said, and whether the outcome was the best possible outcome given the actual conditions, not the assigned conditions, the actual ones. That is the criterion I am trying to write. She fed the room anyway. Every time they took something, she fed the room anyway. That is the fixed fact around which everything else is still in motion. The revision, the disciplinary process, the new module I am building with her help, the slow rewriting of what I think I know about what a kitchen is for. I was there. I watched. I did not fully understand what I was watching until after it was done. That is, I think, exactly what she intended.